On Twitter, John Garamendi tweets, I applaud POTUS's decision to ban imports of Russian oil. We also need to take action to examine the potential price gouging, thank you, by big oil companies driving up the price at the pump. I'm organizing my colleagues in Congress to investigate and hold public hearings. He joins us now, Representative John Garamendi. Good morning, sir.
Well, it is a good morning.
Yeah, from the great
Unless
state.
you're buying gas.
Yeah, not to buy gas from the great state of California. But thank you for saying something, and I'm glad the president's been talking about this as well, is that I really feel these oil companies are taking advantage of this crisis, don't you?
I don't think there's any doubt about it. They've just driven up the price. They're taking advantage of the crisis. This isn't new. I've been through this maybe 4 times in the years I've been in public policy, and every time we look at it and there's no underlying economic reason other than greed.
Yeah, well, and you also tweeted renewable energy systems like wind and solar not only save the planet, they cut our use of oil in energy production. Less demand for oil and gas and electricity production means lower prices for you at the gas pump. Green energy is common sense. It was part of Build Back Better. Why do we want to keep doing this every time there's a crisis? And there will be another one, right, where we have these same dumb arguments over Keystone Pipeline and drilling when, as Jen Psaki said yesterday, there are 9,000 permits that have already been approved. So it's not even about drilling, is it?
No, it's not about drilling. It's not about the Keystone Pipeline. It's really about the oil industry taking advantage of the situation to drive up the cost or the price of a barrel of oil, and then it goes all the way through the chain, through the refinery, and then out to the gas station. Each step along the way, there is, in my view, price gouging. What we need to do here is to do a thorough investigation, let the public see the facts, and then anybody can go to the quarterly reports of the major oil companies and take a look. It's right there, plain to be seen. They're doubling, tripling the stock buybacks. Their cash flow is going through the roof. And why is that? Well, it's not a shortage of oil. It's that they are in a position to drive the price up whenever they want to do it, and they're doing it right now.
Representative, how do I ask this delicately? I think it's hard to work with your colleagues on the other side of the aisle that only seem interested in whatever they can blame on President Biden and Democrats. They in some quarters openly rooting for Putin. I mean, and they don't blame Putin for gas prices. They blame Biden that should want the best for Americans. It almost seems like Republicans are rooting for high gas prices, whatever hurts Biden in an election year.
Well, that's exactly right. And you take a look at their arguments along the way. Somehow Biden caused the war in Ukraine? Really? After 4 years of Trump doing everything he possibly could to cozy up to Putin and to trash and try to reduce or eliminate NATO and the European Union. And so this is Biden's... No. This is a result of Putin finding an opportunity over the last 4 years, thinking that there was a lack of unity in NATO and lack of resolve by the United States. So here we are. And Putin's the one that started this war unnecessarily, killing thousands of people, destroying cities, and totally disrupting the international economy, to say nothing of the war itself. So here we are. With regard to the fuel situation, we are moving away from petroleum, and we need to do that, not only because of the occasional price spikes which the industry inflicts upon us, but also because of climate change. So we're on the right path here, and Biden administration is putting us in that direction. In Congress, we're doing that. With the Republicans don't like us to talk about the Green New Deal, but it is actually happening. We're putting money into these new technologies. We're going to repower the electric grid so that electricity can flow from state to state. All of these things are out there. But right now we've got this extraordinary run-up in the gas at the pump.
Yeah.
And people we all have a reason to be upset. We ought not be paying this much. And certainly the oil industry ought not be taking these extraordinary profits and then passing that not to the folks that are buying the gas, but rather to their stockholders and to their executives.
Agreed. Representative Garamendi, let's talk about, well, speaking of which, I should just say former National Security Advisor John Bolton echoes what you just said. He just said again yesterday, Putin did not move to invade Ukraine during Trump's term because he saw Trump doing a lot of his work for him. He said he thought in a second term, Trump would make good on his desire to get out of NATO, which would then ease Putin's path forward. Bolton also said Trump had no idea what the strategic issues were in Ukraine. You know, as usual, his interest was only in himself and his reelection. So let's talk about, you were on the call with Zelenskyy. You just said, I just finished meeting with President Zelenskyy and several colleagues, congressional colleagues. President Zelenskyy discussed ways we can continue to support Ukraine against Putin's war. Congress must immediately authorize additional humanitarian and defensive relief for Ukraine. Where are you on what we can do? There's obviously all kinds of... experts wrote a new letter yesterday. Can there be a limited no-fly zone over the humanitarian corridors that have already been agreed to by Russia and Ukraine? The problem is Russia's they're not an honorable actor. Even when they agree to a ceasefire, they don't honor it. So that would seem like, that could be a provocative thing as well, right?
Well, absolutely. They do not trust Putin, and do not trust any word that comes from him or his army about no-fly zones or humanitarian corridors. Simply not trustworthy at all. We do know, however, that there are things that can be done, and we're doing those. But before we get to what we're doing, remember that it was $1 billion of military aid to Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine helping him in his election.
Yeah.
So there was that period of time where Ukraine for 2 years was destabilized by Trump. Now that Biden's in office, $1 billion of aid has gone to Ukraine in just the last year. Most of that military equipment, some very deadly defensive equipment called Javelin missiles for armored vehicles. The Ukrainians indicate that maybe as many as several, I think they have well over 300 tanks that have been destroyed, and similarly other kinds of equipment, and airplanes and helicopters taken out of the sky with the Stingers. That is the no-fly zone that is working. The Russian military aircraft are very wary of getting anywhere close to the ground where there may be someone hidden back in the ditch underneath the tree with a Stinger missile that'll take them out of the sky. And we've seen some videos of that happening. So what to do about the humanitarian? Continue to push on the international stage that Russia is killing people as they try to escape. These are civilians, not military. And that Russia is conducting a scorched earth policy, a crime against humanity, and Putin's responsible. The more the world knows of that, the more safety will be available. But right now, it's clearly not safe on those escape routes.
You spoke, Representative Garamendi, after your call with Zelenskyy. You said he knows he's at the top of the kill list. He knows his life is in jeopardy, but he has pushed that aside to lead this nation, an incredible man of courage and leadership. And then you said he went into detail about high schools, kindergartens, apartment buildings, presumably with the intent of breaking the will of the Ukrainian people. He said the Ukrainian people are determined, in his words, to be free, to not be subjects of Putin and Russia, rather to be Ukrainians, to set their own course, to make their democracy. Yesterday, he said, children are under the wreckage. Atrocity. How much longer will the world be an accomplice to ignoring terror? Close the sky right now. Stop the killings. You have the power, but you seem to be losing humanity. Is there something else? Is there another idea with these planes? I understand we turned down the Polish idea because that would, obviously that makes us directly involved. Is there some other idea in how to get these planes to them, do you think?
Well, first of all, we need to understand the planes and then the ability of the Ukrainian Air Force to operate those planes. There's a considerable doubt that the Ukrainian pilots are trained to operate the kinds of planes that Poland would make available. Okay. That needs to be sorted out. There's also the reality, where's the airport? Where are the logistics, the fuel, the armaments? as well as the necessary repair. Most of these planes, if you have 1 week, they may be able to fly 50% of the time. The rest of the time, they need the plane taken care of. So there's a whole serious logistical issue associated with any aircraft, and particularly one from a country in which you may not have any of the infrastructure available to maintain that airplane. So that's a big question. No use sending a plane that you can't use because you can't fuel it or you can't fly it. So that's one of the underlying questions. There is the question that you raised, and that is, does the plane going from Poland directly to Ukraine involve Poland actively in the war? That's really a perception issue on the part of Putin. If he perceives that to be the case, would he then be open to attack Poland? I think that's a stretch. I don't think that would happen. But that is an open question, that being able to operate the plane from airfields in Ukraine, you say, well, let's wait just a moment. Maybe there are other things that can be done, more Stinger missiles. There are mobile anti-aircraft missiles beyond the Stinger that have greater range. Things of that sort may be better in this case. And finally, let's negotiate a safe exit route for the refugees.
You know, it's interesting. You raise an interesting question because Putin has already said that these sanctions are an act of war. So it's also hard to base things on what Putin says, right? Because, or what he's going to consider an escalation.
Exactly right. He could use these sanctions as an act of war, but really the sanctions have been used for many, many years. Actually, really going back to the very beginning of our country, when we and England placed what we would call today sanctions, cutting off trade in one way or another. So it's not new. It's not an act of war, but it is for Russia a very, very serious problem. We are simply shutting down the Russian economy. And one of the things that's really indication of how wise the Biden administration is that the Biden administration really went out and put together the coalition. We've got the coalition of almost every country in the world, with very few exceptions, India being the single biggest and most important exception, and of course China. But with that in place, Biden's administration, his team, allowed the European Union and NATO to take the lead. If you watch, every time a new sanction is announced, it is announced first by the European Union. And frankly, with regard to oil and gas, their announcements, which did precede the president's announcement about the United States cutting off its purchase of Russian oil, the European Union said that they were going to reduce by 2/3 the importation, the purchase of oil, Russian oil, and gas. For Europe, that is a huge, huge impact on their economy.
And
however, the Biden administration got ahead of it, and they set out weeks and actually months before the sanctions were put in place to find ways to backfill the loss of Russian gas and oil. So this has been very, very well thought through. There's still going to be an impact, but nonetheless, that impact is significantly mitigated by the first, Europe taking action, then the United States following, and secondly, the mitigation by backfilling oil and gas to Europe.
Well, and I think Michael McFaul, former ambassador, who's been very outspoken, said it best on Twitter. He just said the U.S. is not sitting on the sidelines on Ukraine. We've done a ton, and we need to do more, but short of declaring war against Russia, which we should not do, Biden has led the free world in supporting the Ukrainian war effort and the economic pressure effort on Russia. I agree with you. I think he's done really an amazing job uniting the world. So I think, one last thing Zelenskyy said, and I think that was in your call with him, Representative, is he said as soon as they start losing the war on the ground, they start using civilians as a tool of war. And that's what I think is troubling, right? Not just this maternity hospital, but what he did in Chechnya, another, you know what I mean, that they're obviously committing war crimes by the day. And because he's losing, Putin, isn't he?
Well, exactly right. What Putin and Russia's way of war, if you can't win quickly, then you simply destroy. It's a scorched earth policy. It's killing civilians. It's destroying communities. He did this in Syria at Aleppo, and also in Grozny in the Chechnya area. And he's doing it. It's very clear from all the video and all the film that that the Russian army goes through a village and just levels it. If there happen to be people there, well, that's collateral damage from their point of view. So civilians are being killed. It's clearly war crimes, left, right, and center. It starts with Putin, but those war crimes go right down to the sergeant that's manning that tank that's blasting away at the community. So there will be a day of reckoning for Russia. That day of reckoning is in place now as the entire world turns against Russia. Putin is an international pariah. His future on the world stage is gone.
Yep.
It is gone, and he will never rebuild the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union as he intends to do.
Yeah, ironically,
the world will not let it happen.
Yeah, Representative, you're absolutely right. Ironically, for this crazy, to what degree crazy we don't know, but was thinking of rebuilding the Soviet Empire. I was just reading an expert saying he has done more damage since I don't know, Tsar Nicholas or somebody to Russia. I mean, he has decimated Russia in record time.
Well, Putin, he absolutely true. And I've said from the very outset that the Russian people are good. They have a heart. They are empathetic. They got a tough situation. They're living in a very, very difficult country with a horrible ruler, an autocrat who's quite willing to crack down. But already there's well over 15,000 Russians that have been arrested and detained for street demonstrations. I've said from the outset, and that's why we shut down all internal communication. There is no information allowed into the country, and the only information in the country is the state propaganda machine. But the hackers of the world are overcoming that. There are reports that in the middle of a news report on the Russian state television, suddenly a pop-up appears of what is actually happening in Ukraine. And so more and more of that will get through. The Russian people will not stand for what is happening to their brothers and sisters, and they will be in the streets. And ultimately, that's the ultimate risk that Putin faces.
Yep.
Take a look. Ukraine in 2014 changed its government because the people of Ukraine said, no more of this.
Yep.
We will not stand for this anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Representative,
I predict that this is going to happen in Russia, and I think sooner than Putin has ever imagined.
I agree. So sorry we went so long because it's so great to have you, Representative John Garamendi of the great, and if he has anything to do with it, low gas price of California.
It's a problem in California, I'll tell you.
Yes, I know.
Okay, we'll go get him.
All right, thanks, Representative. Bye-bye. There he goes, Representative John Garamendi.